1 minute ago, a missile landed in Tel Aviv. Not a standard ballistic warhead, not the Shahab-3 hypersonic round that has been hitting this city for weeks. A missile that the Israeli government is refusing to describe. A missile whose warhead contents have not been confirmed by any Israeli official, any military spokesperson, or any government communication since it hit the ground. And that silence is not procedural. It is not the normal gap between an event and an official assessment. Israeli officials commented on every previous Tel Aviv strike within minutes. They confirmed warhead types. They described damage. They issued guidance. On March 24th, Israeli police even released the specific kilogram weight of the warhead Iran fired that day, 100 kilograms, half the standard, and attributed it directly to Iranian munition choices. That level of detail within hours of impact is the baseline this government established for itself across weeks of this conflict. This time, they have said nothing about what was in the warhead. And the reason that silence is the most alarming thing that has happened in this conflict since Iran struck near the Dimona Nuclear Research Center is this. There is only one category of warhead whose contents a government refuses to confirm publicly when its largest civilian city just got hit. A warhead that may contain something other than conventional high explosives. 1 minute ago, that warhead landed in Tel Aviv, and the Israeli government will not tell its own people what was inside it. In the next several minutes, I am going to show you exactly what missile Iran fired, why the warhead contents matter more than anything else about this strike, what the Israeli government's silence tells you about what it knows and what it is choosing not to say, and what a world that has just watched Iran fire a nuclear-capable missile at Tel Aviv needs to understand about what this conflict has become. To understand why the warhead silence after this morning's Tel Aviv strike is categorically different from every previous silence in this conflict, you need to understand what the phrase nuclear-capable means, and why those two words matter more than any other two words in the current military situation. Nuclear-capable does not mean nuclear-armed. It means the missile platform is designed and certified to carry either a conventional warhead or a nuclear warhead interchangeably. The distinction between a missile that can only carry conventional explosives and a missile that can carry either conventional explosives or a nuclear device is not a technical footnote. It is the entire strategic point. A nuclear-capable missile forces the defender to answer a question that a conventional missile does not ask. When a conventional missile is inbound, the defender knows what it is carrying. The fire control systems are calibrated to defeat the known threat. The civil defense response is calibrated to the expected blast radius and fragmentation pattern of a conventional warhead. When a nuclear-capable missile is inbound, the defender does not know what it is carrying until after it has landed, and the decision about how to respond, militarily and in terms of civilian guidance, has to be made before that information is available. The ambiguity is not a byproduct of the weapon, it is a feature of it. Iran fired a Shahab-3 extended-range variant at Tel Aviv this morning. That choice, selecting the Shahab-3 over the Fatah series, is the most operationally significant decision Iran has made in this entire conflict. The Shahab-3 is Iran's most operationally significant nuclear-capable ballistic missile. It has been at the center of international non-proliferation concern about Iran's weapons program for 2 decades, precisely because it was developed with a range and payload capacity specifically matched to a nuclear warhead configuration. The United States intelligence community, the IAEA, and every major Western defense establishment have assessed the Shahab-3 program as nuclear-capable since the early 2000s. Iran threatened in March 2026 to target the Israeli nuclear site at Dimona if regime change was sought, and then followed through with strikes near Dimona on March 21st, injuring at least 180 people and marking the first time Iranian missiles penetrated Israeli air defenses in the area surrounding Israel's primary nuclear facility. That strike established that Iran is operationally willing to target nuclear-adjacent infrastructure. The Dimona strike also placed radioactive materials in the operational environment of this conflict, materials that were not present in any previous chapter of the Israeli-Iranian confrontation. When Iran fires a Shahab-3 at Tel Aviv after already demonstrating willingness to engage with nuclear-adjacent targets, the question of what is in the warhead is not an academic distinction. It is the question that every Israeli defense authority, every American intelligence analyst watching the strike in real time, and every government on Earth monitoring this conflict had to ask simultaneously the moment the launch was detected. And the Israeli government, which maintains a long-standing policy of deliberate nuclear ambiguity about its own arsenal, will not answer that question for its own civilian population. The silence after this morning's Shahab-3 strike is not the first silence in this conflict that has protected the government's position at the cost of civilian information. It is the fourth, and the most consequential. Before the first uncontested Tel Aviv strike, the Israeli government maintained public silence about the state of interceptor depletion, even as U.S. officials were confirming to American media that Israel was running critically low. That silence meant the civilian population had no advance information that the defensive architecture was changing beneath them. Before the shelter strike that killed 9 people, the government's public guidance remained unchanged even as the coverage gap it described had materially shifted. After the Dimona-adjacent strike, the full damage picture was never disclosed publicly, despite international organizations noting it was the first time Iranian missiles had penetrated defenses around Israel's nuclear research center. In each case, the government possessed information directly relevant to civilian safety. In each case, it chose not to share that information in real time. The pattern is consistent. The Warhead silence after this morning's Tel Aviv strike is the most consequential instance of that pattern yet, because the information being withheld is not about whether the interceptors will work or whether the shelter will protect you. It is about whether the air being breathed and the ground being stood on in Tel Aviv right now requires immediate evacuation rather than continued sheltering in place. That is not a military secret. That is survival information, and the Israeli government is not providing it. The intelligence picture available to Israeli defense authorities in the minutes and hours after this strike is significantly more detailed than anything that has been communicated publicly, and understanding what that picture likely contains is essential to understanding why the silence is a choice rather than a gap. Israel's strategic intelligence monitoring of Iranian missile programs is among the most detailed and most capable in the world. Unit 8200, the signals intelligence arm of Israeli military intelligence, monitors Iranian missile facilities, launch preparations, and telemetry in real time. When a Shahab-3 is prepared for launch, the launch sequence involves observable activities including fuel handling for the liquid-fueled variants, transporter erector launcher positioning, and communications patterns between the launch crew and command infrastructure that Israeli intelligence monitors continuously. The warhead configuration installed on a Shahab-3 before launch is not always observable from outside the preparation facility, but the missile's trajectory, its terminal velocity, the detonation pattern of the warhead upon impact, and the post-impact signatures from the strike site all contribute to a damage assessment that Israeli authorities are conducting right now. That assessment tells them what was in the warhead with a level of certainty that is significantly higher than zero, and significantly higher than anything the current public posture would suggest. The Israeli government's decision not to share that assessment with its civilian population is a decision that has been made consciously and deliberately. It follows the same logic that produced every previous silence in this conflict. The government decides what information the public receives, when it receives it, and in what form. And the public, living in the city the missile just hit, makes safety decisions based on whatever the government chooses to provide. This morning, the government has chosen to provide nothing about what was inside the warhead. Now let us address directly the question your audience is asking right now, and that deserves an honest analytical answer rather than either confirmation or dismissal. Did Iran fire a nuclear warhead at Tel Aviv this morning? The honest answer, based on available evidence, is that a nuclear detonation in Tel Aviv would be instantly observable through seismic monitoring networks, atmospheric sensors, and satellite observation systems operated by the United States, Russia, China, the United Kingdom, France, and multiple independent monitoring organizations, including the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization. A nuclear detonation at any yield above the very lowest tactical threshold would produce a seismic signature detectable worldwide within minutes. It would produce an electromagnetic pulse detectable across the region. It would produce a thermal and optical signature observable by surveillance satellites in multiple orbits. None of those signatures have been reported by any independent monitoring organization as of this morning. That absence is the strongest available evidence that what landed in Tel Aviv this morning was not a nuclear detonation in the conventional sense. But that is not the only question worth asking. A radiological dispersal device, a dirty bomb in common terminology, uses conventional explosives to disperse radioactive material without producing a nuclear chain reaction. It produces no seismic signature. It produces no electromagnetic pulse. It produces no optical or thermal signature beyond a conventional explosion, but it distributes radioactive contamination across the area surrounding the detonation point in a pattern determined by the specific materials used, the quantity of those materials, and the meteorological conditions at the time of detonation. The Dimona-adjacent strike on March 21st struck a region housing Israel's Shimon Peres Negev Nuclear Research Center, a facility that contains radioactive materials. Iran's willingness to engage that target, combined with its planning sophistication demonstrated across weeks of this conflict, places the question of radiological warhead incorporation within the realm of analytical possibility rather than pure speculation. The Israeli government knows whether the post-impact assessment of this morning's Tel Aviv strike shows signatures consistent with radiological dispersal. It is not saying. The civilian population of Tel Aviv, which is currently sheltering, going about whatever activities remain possible in a city under sustained ballistic missile attack and making decisions about whether to evacuate or remain, does not have that information. That is the most urgent and most human dimension of this morning's warhead silence. The geopolitical consequences of Iran firing a nuclear-capable missile at Tel Aviv extend beyond the immediate civilian protection picture into territory that every major power on Earth is now navigating simultaneously. Here is the critical analytical point. Iran does not need to have fired a nuclear or radiological warhead to achieve the strategic effect of having fired a nuclear-capable missile and then watching the target government refuse to confirm what was in it. The strategic effect of that ambiguity is operating right now across every capital watching this conflict. It is operating in Moscow, where Russian military analysts are studying the Israeli government's silence as a data point about how nuclear-capable missile ambiguity functions in a real conflict environment. It is operating in Beijing, where Chinese strategic planners are assessing the deterrence implications of a regional power, successfully deploying nuclear ambiguity against a nuclear-armed state's closest ally. It is operating in Pyongyang, where North Korean military doctrine has long incorporated the strategic value of nuclear ambiguity, and where this morning represents a live demonstration of that doctrine's effectiveness against one of the world's most sophisticated defense establishments. Israel's own nuclear posture is built on deliberate ambiguity, neither confirming nor denying possession of nuclear weapons, the policy known as amimut. Iran has now turned that strategic logic back toward Israel. By firing a nuclear-capable platform at Tel Aviv and allowing the warhead question to sit unanswered in public, Iran has activated strategic ambiguity as an offensive tool, deploying the same logic Israel has used to manage deterrence for decades, and using it to create exactly the confusion and silence in Jerusalem that Israel has used to create confusion and silence in Tehran for 50 years. The United States' own silence about the warhead's nature is the second most alarming silence of this morning. America's extended nuclear deterrence guarantee to its allies, the commitment that a nuclear attack on an ally is treated as an attack on the United States, is designed to prevent precisely this category of ambiguous nuclear threat from becoming operationally active against an allied population center. The administration knows what category of event it is managing. It is not saying publicly, and that silence from the world's preeminent nuclear power about the nature of the warhead that just landed in its closest Middle Eastern ally's largest civilian city tells you something specific about how unprecedented and how difficult this morning's decision space actually is. The Netanyahu government is managing this morning's warhead silence in the context of the most politically precarious domestic environment of this entire conflict: multiple uncontested strikes on Tel Aviv, strikes on Jerusalem, the Dimona-adjacent strike whose full damage picture has never been publicly disclosed, and now a nuclear-capable missile strike on Tel Aviv whose warhead contents are being withheld from the civilian population living in the impact area. The domestic political equation has now reached a threshold that none of the preceding strikes individually produced. A government that pledged swift and decisive action, that described on day 4 a campaign that would quickly neutralize Iran's ability to threaten Israeli cities, is now in its 5th week of conflict, with Iran demonstrating enough retained capability to fire its nuclear-capable strategic missile platform at the same city it has been unable to fully protect since the interceptor supply ran dry. The questions being asked inside the Knesset this morning are not questions that can be answered by pointing to offensive successes in the 600-plus strikes Israel has conducted on Iranian missile facilities. Those successes are real. They coexist with this morning's reality in a way that neither cancels the other. And the hardest political question this morning is not military. It is moral. At what point does a government that possesses post-impact intelligence about what a warhead contained, that can assess whether its largest city's air and ground require emergency radiological response, have an obligation to tell the people living in that city what it knows? The logic of operational security says, withhold information that would help the adversary, release information that helps the civilian. By that logic, there is no operational security justification for withholding radiological contamination data from the population currently in the impact area. The adversary already knows what it put in the warhead. The only people this morning's silence is keeping in the dark are the Israeli civilians it was supposed to protect. The open question this morning's warhead silence leaves hanging over Tel Aviv and over this entire conflict is not whether Iran fired a nuclear weapon. The monitoring systems that would detect a nuclear detonation have not reported one. The open question is what Iran put in that warhead, and whether the Israeli government knows. And if the Israeli government genuinely does not yet know what was in the warhead that landed in its largest city this morning, if the post-impact assessment has not yet produced a clear picture, the implications for the state of Israeli strategic intelligence and the credibility of the government's ability to protect its population are equally significant as if they know and are choosing not to say. Either way, the silence is not acceptable. Either way, the civilians of Tel Aviv deserve an answer that they are not getting. And either way, the world watching this conflict has just witnessed something that the entire history of the nuclear age has never produced before: a nuclear-capable missile platform striking a major Western Allied civilian population center, the government of that population center refusing to say what was inside it, and the world's preeminent nuclear power saying nothing about what it knows. The history of this nuclear age has produced many moments where the worst case was narrowly avoided. This morning's Warhead silence is either the beginning of the sentence that explains how this one was avoided too, or it is the beginning of a different sentence entirely. And the difference between those two sentences is the most important thing happening in the world right now. Thanks for watching. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If the Israeli government's post-impact assessment of this morning's Tel Aviv strike has produced intelligence about the warhead contents that is not being shared with the civilian population currently in the impact area, at what point does withholding that information cross from operational security into a failure of the government's most fundamental obligation to the people it governs? And what does Iran's decision to fire a nuclear-capable missile platform at Tel Aviv tell you about what it calculated the strategic ambiguity of that choice would achieve, regardless of what was actually in the warhead? Subscribe and like if you want to stay updated. I'll see you in the next one.